I hope she said nice things. I don't know.
I should have said it in English altogether.
No, it's fine. I trust you. But if it was really bad, I'm sorry. That's all you've got. It's just me. We got a little bit of overload on the microphone, but I think we're going to fix that. I also have some good news. I'm the last person between you and some coffee or a break. So I don't think there is any bad news. I'm going to look more on the education side today. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation does a lot of work with in business and insight and public analysis and education, but I'm mostly going to look at the education. I'm trying to get into this idea of schools of thought. Now, when I do some talks, I introduce myself as a generalist. Do you know the idea of a generalist? Somebody who doesn't know much about anything in particular. And people then wonder, why are you here? You're just a generalist. What use are you? And it's so pervasive, this idea that unless you're a specialist, you shouldn't be invited, that I was for a while discouraged from saying I'm a generalist. But I'm going to make the argument today that it actually, people who can see the big picture, you'll judge whether I can or not, people who can see the big picture, who can see patterns, who can see systems at play, might have a big role in the future because, well, let's have a look at why it might be so. Now, don't worry about the text. Let's just look at the three words that are here. We're very used to the microscope. We're very used to the telescope. But not that many, I've heard it mentioned once today, but not many people are used to the word macroscope, which is the idea of dropping detail, abandoning detail in search of patterns. Now, why is that? I think, except that I heard it once today by chance, why don't we look at the big picture more often? Is it that we have a way of thinking which is built for another age? Was it built for the Industrial Revolution? Was it the idea that the world is like a machine, or machine-like, where direct causation is what we should look at, where we analyze the parts, and we can build a machine out of the parts. We can understand, predict, and control. And look what we've built with it. Fantastic. We understand, predict, and control. It's the basis of science. But it's also spread over into more than science, as we know. There's a picture of an economy from de Rosnay. This is a chap who was writing particularly, he's still alive, he's a Frenchman, and he wrote a book called The Microscope. It's well worth looking up, because it's free online now, as a PDF. And this is his drawing, or we've adapted it, of an economy. But it's the edges of it. It extends to the edge of the white circle. An economy is actually supposed to be like some sort of machine that can be at equilibrium. Only machines can be at rest and equilibrium, apparently. It's a bit like a clockwork. There's an idealized notion of production, an idealized notion of consumption. The amount of money around doesn't have any effect on what is produced, apparently. And those things called resources and those things called wastes are excluded from the economy proper with this model. Now, I think you know and I know that's fairly ridiculous. It's an artificially constrained notion of an economy which is working according to a mechanistic idea that we move from equilibrium to equilibrium. It's very limited. So you get the idea that this is the linear economy. It's take, make, and dispose. A lot of fossil fuels involved, a lot of waste. It's a waste production economy, we know that. The most of it, what it produces is waste. But it's also capital reducing. It treats capital as income. Let's get the resources, push it through. We can convert that into money capital, and that will solve all our problems because we can always reinvest it in new technology and head towards the singularity. As if we could. It's a very approximate way of looking at things. Here we are, as an owl. It sort of looks like an owl, it's sort of there. But of course, that's a little bit of a characterization. That's complicated. That's more than the owl. It's more than a simple machine. We can get as complicated as that, but it isn't complex. When that plane lands, takes off, does what it does, it's still a plane at the end of the day, God willing, you know. It's still a plane at the end of the day. You can understand it in principle. You know how it works. It does what it says, as we say in England, on the tin. It does what it says on the tin, on the package. It's an airplane. But here are some thinkers who years ago, some of you may have heard of, thinkers years ago who said, hang on, that's not really how the world works, is it? I'm not sure the world works in a mechanistic way, that it's so limited and approximate. We think it's more complex. You've got Michael Braungart, William McDonough. You've got natural capitalism from Amory Lovins, biomimicry, Janine Benyus. Blue economy, Gunter Pauli is a very able speaker, and I wouldn't in any sense ignore what Gunter has to say, very interesting. Industrial ecology for the folks who like that strange combination of words. And performance economy from Walter Stahel. And to tell the truth, I think Walter Stahel doesn't quite go along with this insights from living systems thing, but I shall ask him about it next time I see him. So there's the model of the world as it really works, perhaps. Energy through material cycle. It's fairly intuitive and obvious, but that's the source of all economy, of all activity. You need the energy. Here is an example of the carbon cycle. Now this is complex. It's not just complicated. It's complex. We don't have to understand that, but I'm going to come back to that diagram quite soon. And here's a picture of systems. Now, Sally Gerner, Bob Ulanovich had a look at systems overall. They weren't the first to do it. And it seems that most real-world systems are not mechanical out there at all. They're not understand, predict, and control. And neither are they particularly random. We use statistics to have a look at systems which appear random. But actually, most real-world systems, and this will include an economy, are complex adaptive systems. They're somewhere in the middle, and we've begun to understand about complex adaptive systems since we got into computer modeling. We could then map dynamic systems. So that's where most things are, in the middle. So why have we got an economy that thinks it's on the left when most real systems are here? And I'm going to just run through, you'll know most of them, some of the characteristics of this sort of system. You've got on the left how we traditionally treat things. Do you know, it's solid, it's about forces, it's a closed system, it's linear causality. An example would be a crystal. It's foreseeable, reproducible, and reversible. But this is where most systems are on the right-hand side. They might occasionally have characteristics here, but most of them are there. So what? So what's it got to do with cradle to cradle? What's it got to do with learning? Well, maybe, and probably you spotted it 10 minutes ago, and you're thinking coffee is due. Most of our education system still lives on the left more often than it lives on the right. It's still more about chopping things up and analyzing them and knowledge. Yes, there are many examples. I'm sure this university is exactly one of them, where we get more across the disciplines, we get more into complex systems and understanding patterns. But let's look at some of the characteristics of learning in this area. And here's a quick test, by the way, if you don't think this is relevant. You try standing on a plank, on a log, and keep still. You won't be able to do it. Nobody can. We have an unfortunate sense that things are not as dynamic as they really are. But you can't even do that as a human. You can't stand still on a plank, on a log. You'll be always moving. That's just in case you were a little cynical. Things are very, very complex, as we say, and not only are they complex, they're highly interdependent. And these are fundamentals. They're not, oh, it's a bit complex or it's a bit interdependent. These are fundamental characteristics of complex adaptive systems. And back to this one. Why do some people say, if you look top right, that, oh, well, there's only a small amount of carbon coming from human activity, top right, and some from the soils there. How can that, compared to all of the carbon, possibly have an effect that we might attribute to or call climate change? Well, anybody who understands systems would go, yeah, that could do it, because it iterates, it's feedback. Feedback in the system, a small change can multiply through the system to create a tipping point, a large change. And sometimes we don't really understand this idea of iteration, of taking more cycles. Even in sort of good-minded people who think recycling's a great idea. Walter Starheld took the example of aluminium cans. They've got a very short cycle, about 3 months in some markets. And he took a ton of aluminium as an example and asked, what would happen to this ton of aluminium at 90% recycling? Do you know how long that ton of aluminium would last before you've lost it all at 90% recycling? Do you know how to work that out? It doesn't matter if you don't. But you take the number 70, and you take the percentage, which in this case is 10%, divide it into 70, you've got 7 cycles before half of it is gone. So 7 cycles would be 7 times 3, 21 months. So let's say that we double that. In under 4 years, you've lost all of it at 90% recycling. So why do we say recycling is such a great idea if you're going to lose all of it in 4 years? You know, that's because you don't systems think. Not you, but one isn't systems thinking. You can say 90% sounds great, but it's the 10% leakage that really matters. So people often do not understand what it means to look at a system through a period of time, or how change can suddenly creep up. People go, oh, well, it's all right. Temperatures have only gone up to here. As though it was a little, a track up a hill. A little bit more would be okay. They seem to ignore the tipping points, that things can suddenly change in systems. And it can get very turbulent, different forms can emerge, you might well know all of that. It can work at different scales, of course. You've got relationships of self-similarity at different scales. There's the classic one where the fractal, self-similarity at different scales, but it indicates a simple process operating in the background of feedback. And you can look at it different layers. You've got multiple meanings depending on what layer you're looking at. So multiple perspectives are part of this systems thinking. And there's emergence, new properties can come out. They don't come out of machines. Your plane is still a plane, it doesn't turn into an insect or something like that. But complex adaptive systems can show emergent properties. Now, why does all of that matter? If that's your basic understanding of the world, that it's a complex adaptive system, that it's subject to feedback. Feedback changes everything in terms of how you work. If you realize that there is self-similarity at different scales, blah, 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 you might be able to look at an economy in terms of flows rather differently. This is again from Bob Ulanovich and Sally Gerner. There's a trade-off between more efficiency, throughput, and resilience, or in fact stagnation. If there are too many nodes and connections, you don't really get change. Schools are often like that. All it changes is you've got a computer, you've still got a room, 30 people, a knowledge-based curriculum, and 50 minutes. How long has it been like that, and why? But if you get the interplay between the two right, you get effectiveness. Oh, that's a word we've heard before. It endures if it's effective. It doesn't endure if it's just efficient. That's this financial crash happening off on the left there. Too much efficiency increases the risk to the system. This is just systems understanding. It's not genius, it's not something I've done. It's just how we understand systems. I'll skip that one. It's just showing that all systems go through these stages, living systems anyway, so that would be an insight. The diagram we've discussed before. This is one that's often used. It's not perfect, but it's useful. And if you wanted to know where perhaps Cradle to Cradle fitted in a slightly bigger picture, I think we can put on one page what a circular economy is and where Cradle to Cradle sits. But notice it's got some assumptions, not assumptions, it's got some lead-in points. The worldviews do matter. And if we're talking about education, the worldview that people are using to look at the world, the economy, has to be fit for purpose. It can't be something out of 1900s, 1950s. It's got to be contemporary with what we understand about complex adaptive systems, doesn't it? Secondly, science sees a world of dynamic systems, so okay, we've got the science there to help us do this. And thirdly, we should perhaps hope that economics increasingly reflects this science. It doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't. And then the next bit you know very well, everything is food, shift to renewables, go from goods to services if possible, or performance, celebrate diversity. But the two things that we often add on is that if you're going to use markets, it's not a new thing, if you're going to use markets as an information source, full costs need to be in the price. And lastly, something we don't talk about a lot, is that money and finance are not outside the system, they're actually in it. The industrial system is led by credit, the provision of credit. And so if you were to say, what about educating for a circular economy? It's really the unfoldment of systems thinking applied to resources. And that takes in, I think, Cradle to Cradle. And that's what we want to end up with. This is from John Fullerton, a move from a degenerative system through totally less bad, which is sustainability, to a regenerative circular economy. This whole idea you need to upcycle because you want to rebuild capital. And this is the idea that we've lost before. All systems rely on stocks and flows if they're enduring. And how you maintain and care for stocks certainly affects what flows you get from it. That again would be a product of basic systems thinking 101. The question you'd ask is, where are my stocks? What are my flows? And not imagine you can take capital and just run it down. What capitalist ever dissolves his or her capital? Just about to finish. We do a lot online. We've been playing with an online festival looking at innovation that's just come to an end this last week. We do quite a lot of work. Let's just get to about reports. I thought there was one there. There's a Ellen MacArthur Fellowship. We work with top universities, providing summer school and support where the tutor comes along with the student. It's one of the few ones where both come together. So I think our website's the best place to find out more about what education programs we're doing, but I just wanted to emphasize that systems thinking for us is the core of understanding whether you're looking at the circular economy or its engine, which is cradle to cradle. So thank you very much. That's it.